Today, we're going to take a new look at Surrey's butterflies. We're going to do this mainly by introducing a new resource for the Surrey data, including maps, graphs, tables, etc., providing up-to-date information on the county's butterflies. We're going to do this by looking quickly at the data, where it comes from, what it is, a few words on the mapping of data. The core of the presentation is going to be on the introduction of the website itself, with a few comments afterwards on its design and the way it was constructed. First, a few words about me. I started with a background of a PhD in physics, but I worked in scientific software for about 44 years, mostly on intergovernmental projects, and in that time I encountered a huge range of software. I retired in 2020. I'm now data manager for the Surrey and South West London BC branch. The approach here is going to be to review the data we have. There's a lot of new data since 2018, which has not been seen before. The main mechanism, as I said, was a new web-based scheme, which is linked to the BC branch site, and that's been introduced in the Surrey Skipper recently. And it's also, the scheme also produces a lot of internal data sets for use. The current state is, as of March 2023, covering the data from the year 2000 up to 2022. It's going to be updated in due course. New data will appear when it becomes available. Generally, this is unfortunately only once a year, about every March. We might also add new functionality to the site to provide different perspectives on the data. I say this now because if you're watching on YouTube, the data you see may not correspond to what we have here. The history of butterflies in Surrey was covered in the book Butterflies of Surrey, first in 1995, and then the current one, the revisited second book in 2013. That's still available. It was a major undertaking, and there was no appetite for doing another edition of that now. There were, however, after that time, several annual reports which showed roughly similar data to that I'm presenting here. There's the long-running Surrey Skipper magazine, which used to be distributed as a printed booklet, but now is mostly arrives as a PDF. On the left is the book, and on the right is the Surrey Skipper of the launch of the book. That's in 2014, with some of the authors involved. So what I don't cover here is I don't cover details of identification of butterflies. There are plenty of sites that do that, and I have links on my site to those sites. I don't include any butterfly photos. There are plenty of those elsewhere too. Perhaps more seriously, I don't compare our data with other branches, perhaps neighbouring counties, or with the national data, simply because I don't yet have the data available. Very importantly, my aim here is to present the data, not to interpret it. Looking now at the butterfly data, the data arrives from a lot of different sources. The main mechanism for gathering butterfly, certainly in abundance data, is from transects and similar formal mechanisms. But there's an awful lot of iRecord data and other ad hoc recordings that go on, and these are very important for giving distribution data. There are the formally run BC schemes, the Big Butterfly Count in the summer every year, and the Garden Butterfly Survey, which goes on. My aim is to aggregate all these recordings together on a quinquennial basis, that's every 5 years, or sometimes I will look at just half the period involved here, the 2000 to 11, and then 2012 onwards to 2022. Sometimes I just use the latter. I get data from two sources, and perhaps surprisingly only these two. I get data from the UK BMS. They are tasked with providing the basis for the transect recordings and for the wider countryside butterfly survey data. I also get data from the Vice County Recorder. That includes the transect data, but also additionally, and very importantly, the iRecord data and all the other ad hoc data that is received. The data I receive essentially tells me what species are seen, where it was seen, the date it was seen, and how many were seen. I process the data in two different ways, the two different paths entirely for the sources of the data. The UKBMS data is used for abundance. I first resolve the Essex and small skippers where I can. They are very difficult to determine during a transect, but there are agreed mechanisms for resolving which is which. As I say, not always possible. Likewise, some transects can't be walked every week of the year. People are on holiday and can't find a deputy, perhaps, or the weather is too poor in a whole week. I can interpolate the odd weeks. There are certainly limits on how far that can be taken. The most important aspect here for abundance statistics is the fact you have to normalise the whole for the number of transects walked, else you simply base your abundance on how many transects there were. The county data, in contrast, I use for distribution and phenology. The data I receive, I aggregate together and I produce summary tables for use on the websites. I produce maps, which we'll see, and other graphics. I also automatically produce the web pages which hold all this together. Now a few words on mapping. The Ordnance Survey divides up the country into the 100-kilometre grids with letters. We are in SU and TQ. The border of those two runs roughly through Woking and Guildford. When I talk about Surrey here, I actually mean the Vice County of Surrey. Vice counties were established a long time ago to provide a stable and consistent mechanism for recording almost everything biological in counties. The county borders over the years have changed, but the vice counties have not. And Kukera is an excellent resource, but specifically here, it actually tells you where the vice county boundaries are. The data I use here is for the Vice County of Surrey, which is Vice County 17. It also, conveniently, corresponds to the Surrey and South West London BC branch area. So here's a look at the Vice County of Surrey. The purple outline is the Vice County. Things have changed over the years. One of the major changes was the reorganisation in 1974, which removed all of South West London from Surrey. It also removed Gatwick Airport from Surrey. The red patch is Spelthorne, which was added to Surrey. That I don't have statistics for. That is Vice County 21. So there are a number of odd little patches around the border there. Some of them are quite small that you can't actually see on here. And you just have to look at Kukera to work out where the border really is, if necessary. Area units. On the previous image, you saw the hectad numbers, which are the 10 by 10 kilometre grids. That's the standard on all Ordnance Survey maps. I sometimes use the quadrants, which are the 5 by 5 kilometres quadrants, because there are 4 of them in each hectad. Very commonly in the past, we used tetrads for recording data, but I don't use that here at all. All modern recording is done with monads. So all the maps, etc. here are monad based, which is the 1 kilometre grid square on standard Ordnance Survey maps. My standard map of Surrey, I add the the roads which I think are sufficient to inform most people as to where things are. The pattern of roads is very characteristic, and people should be able to work out where places are without all the place names. If you add place names to a map like this, it gets very complicated. I also show the underlying bedrock in the county, the big grey band through the middle being the North Downs of chalk, with the sandstones in south and the sandy soils up in the northwest. The white areas are the clay-based soils, the London clay in the north and the Wealden clays in the south. If we add to that map the minor roads and local roads, etc., you see the urbanisation of Surrey. It is a very urban county. The gardens there do provide, of course, excellent habitats for butterflies. So, moving on now, we've talked about the site enough. We need to go and look at it. Moving across to the website, we come first to a page of the species. The Surrey species are in their taxonomic order down the left-hand side, with a bunch of tabs across the top here, and we'll explore each of those in turn. But rather than look at dingy skipper, we'll try silver-spotted skipper. It's the species associated with the county. It is a vulnerable species, as we see here. Underneath, there are 3 buttons. The priority information moves us to the priority page, and we'll see those in just a moment. The BC information takes us to the butterfly conservation page, and the UK butterflies takes us to the UK butterflies page for the species, which has a lot more information on. Next up is the distribution. It's a little big. Control minus, make it a little smaller. So here we see the distribution of silver-spotted skipper across the county along the chalk downs. That's their principal habitat. So below that is the occupancy, and occupancy here is the percentage of the monads in the county which have this species found in it. There are 2,105 monads in total, so 1% to 2% of the monads is not a great deal. This is a fairly uncommon butterfly. The blue line on there is the linear trend line over all the years. This one heads very slightly downwards. 2018 was an exceptionally good year for many species, and so the last 5 years, the orange trend line is a little more steeply down. From the transect data, we see the abundance, the actual number of them is slightly up, both in the full period, the blue line, and in the orange trend line for just the 5 years. And flight weeks, when the butterfly is seen, the period here of 2000 to 2022 is divided into 2. The blue one here is the earlier and orange the later. We see that the peak of the season has moved a slight bit forwards, although the snag here is that these graphs are averaged over all the years in those periods, and that leads sometimes to double peaks, etc. So have a little bit careful about that. The phenology is slightly more complicated. The blue line at the bottom represents the first record date, and the green line at the top represents the last record date. In general, the blue line or the blue trend line through those points heads downwards. Butterflies are being seen earlier, and also the green line normally actually trends upwards. Butterflies are being seen later. Now, it is possible this is due to climate change, But it is also possible that, at least probably mixed with climate change, there is the issue of the fact that there is more recording. Therefore, there is more likelihood of seeing butterflies out of their original season. The orange line through the middle is the date on which most were seen. And here, again, that tends slightly earlier each year. The orange line can get confused if the species is bivoltine, something like the Adonis blue, where there are two separate broods. If the brood is always the first, then the most line appears earlier. If it's always the second, then it's later. But it can be, and as in that case, where it's sometimes one and sometimes the other, in which case the trend line can run through the middle, and that doesn't actually... it can actually appear in the worst of the season for them. The bottom is a list of the larval host plants. This is reasonably straightforward here because it's only sheep's fescue. Let's move to something which is a little more interesting. Let's say white admiral. We see quite a wide distribution. But I must say something here about the symbology, which I should have mentioned before. The full green circles are what I call the stable distribution, where butterflies have been seen in both of the halves of the period I'm looking at. The open circles are where it was seen in any of the years 2000 to 2011, but not in any of the years thereafter. And similarly, the little triangles pointing upwards are green triangles pointing upwards, indicate that they were not seen in any of the years earlier in the century, but have been seen in the years later. But we were primarily looking down here for the larval host plants. In this case, there are three. Sometimes there's a lot, particularly in the grass species. The normal ones, like this one, snowberry, is a non-preferred plant, but possible. Their preferred plants, the principal larval host plant, are the ones that are bold. And here, if I click on the button, I end up at the page at the Kew Plants of the World online. That's a terrific resource for all plants of the world, really. Okay, so moving back up to the top, we can move to the priority species. And just for sake, we'll move to silver-spotted skipper. The description here of its sort of conservation history in the county. Buttons underneath. The right-hand two are the same as they were before. The other one takes us back to the page we've just come from. So priority of information takes you one way, local information takes you back again. And for most of these species, there is simply a much more detailed plot of where they've been found. On a quinquennial basis, every 5 years, starting 0 and 5. So we're most of the way through the last one now. We really don't have time today to go into discussing what all these graphs mean. There was a lot here. Some other specific cases I will look at here. The brown hair streak is in fact the brown streak egg map with their larval host plants shown with the little green diamonds. This is monad based. That's an ongoing topic. There's a lot of work done here up to the pandemic, where its range was greatly, or its apparent range was greatly increased. Another one I should mention is the black hair streak. The black hair streak is now recognised as a species in the county, even though it was an unofficial introduction. And this plots its locations and its gradual spread out from the what we think was the initial site of introduction. There is a single moth here too, last in the list, the straw bell. That's the only data I have for moths at the moment. We hope to expand to the more important species in the county. Next tab across here is the Others tab. This is just displaying where rarer species were found. They arrive by multiple means. I won't go into all those now, but they're occasionally seen. So I don't give dates on here, except for I don't plot the great dates. Underneath is the table of when they're all seen. So we have occasional Camberwell beauties there. Looking now at the trends. First up is the distribution since the start of the century. This is where things start to get difficult, because the results you see here are primarily based on the fact that more recording is being done, quite significantly so. The top species there have increased apparently enormously. That's because their distribution at the start of the century was relatively limited. They have themselves, we know, spread, but the percentages here look unrealistic. The 5 years shows less effect. I need to get more in here. So grizzled skipper here is about the middle of the table. So 15 species have increased and the rest have all decreased. But that's in distribution. Looking now at the abundance trends are normalised against the effect of more monitoring, but again, some have increased markedly. Some may have increased, like wood white, because we've been doing a lot of work in conservation. There's been the project ongoing there in the Wealden wood whites. And also here, the small blue, another project ongoing. So that may have affected those results. Who knows? Because we might be doing more transects in areas where they appear. But what is worrying down here is Adonis blue. 70% decrease in 5 years. That's not good. And we are, this is over the whole period. That's not good. And we need to do something about that. Because now moving to the 5-year trends, looking at the bottom, Adonis blue is 71% down in just the 5 years. That's not good at all. What is better, though, is grayling appears to be doing quite well. The flight dates are when you expect to see things. So the trends here, again, come from the plots. Now, the first column, this is for each species. The first column is the trend on the first day. That was the blue lines from the original plot. Let's take an example. Let's look, say, White Admiral. So here, minus 0.6. So that's about 12 hours. So on average, over all the years, it is now appearing 12 hours earlier every year. That's every year. What's perhaps more surprising is it's appearing later in the year by 1.5 days per year. That's quite a big increase, leading to an overall change in the days seen of 2.1. That's every year, which means over the 23 years, that's 48 days difference. That's quite surprising. So projected now are first appearance on the 20th of June, the last on the 3rd of September. So its flight period is now 74 days. And there's data down here for all the species. Now, sometimes the flight change days are unreliable for a variety of reasons. Black hair streak, for example, have not been here long enough to make any decision on that. A lot of the others are overwintering species, which can appear roughly any day of the year. So now let's look at calendar, which is the simplistic calendar for the year. Let's look down at July, a good month. So July the 7th, we're likely to see our first brown hair streak. So obviously a late species. The 7th of July, we are likely to see the most number of silver wash fritillary. These are going to, of course, be weather dependent. But on the 8th, the next day, is the last, or predicted last, grizzle skipper. So it gives you an idea of when things are going to be available or visible, etc. down through the year. Down at the bottom, 30th of December was the last peacock. Well, as I said, that can be pretty much any time. So coming back up to the top and moving across now to the transects. As we've said, transects are an extremely important way, indeed the only way, of determining abundance without biasing. It's a little smaller. So this is the map of all the transect sites in the county, and there's a lot of them, and they're widely distributed. There are areas which could do with more. Please see Bill Downey, our transect coordinator, if you would like to walk a transect anywhere, but particularly in the areas that need them most. The numbers on here refer to the index, which is just underneath. Let's make that a little bigger. Site number 12, not visible on the map above, Box Hill Dukes. That's the grid reference, which is what we might call the nominal grid reference for the transect. It doesn't indicate the start, for example, or the finish or whatever. It's just a nominal area. The description afterwards is the UKBMS habitat description, the primary description for that transect. There's also allowed to be a secondary habitat, but I don't show those here. This gives you an idea of the habitat for that transect, Box Hill Dukes, and that's just exactly right for it. So, what information do we get out of the transects? Well, the answer to that is a lot. So this is the transect sites ranked by the number of species shown, but in only 2022. So each year you get a new one of these. There were 46 species which were seen on transects. And let's take the example of, this is the rank down the left-hand side. We'll take the example here of the joint 11th, Box Hill Viewpoint, well-known place. 30 species were seen during the year. The most species were seen on July the 8th, which is actually, as we see in that table, quite a common maximum. And on that day, 14 species were shown. And then in general, it was walked 27 times in that year, and it's been walked for 23 years. And there's a long table down there. I won't go to the bottom. The other way round of looking at that is for each species, how many transects were they seen on? So meadow brown, I think really quite surprisingly, was seen on 139 of the 142 sites. That's very impressive. Total recording here, 53,000. That's a lot. Their best week was the 1st of July, and it was seen in that week on 131 sites. That's really pretty impressive. And the rest goes down, getting less and less sites. So something like Silverwash Fritillary down here, only 69, still over 1,000 seen. That's a lot. Okay, top counts. So we're looking at the top count per transect. Denby's Llanbarnby is a famous place for Chalk Hill Blues. So there was one week in which there were 753. That takes some counting. The record in the previous years was over 3,000. Amazing. The final one is whether the current year was a new record. And what's perhaps very pleasing is Grayling on the 26th of July, Chobham Grazing South saw 69, which was up from a previous record of 56, so it gets a star. There can be an equals in that column if these two numbers are equal, but there weren't any this year. This is a big table. Control minus, make it a little bit smaller. Okay, so what have we here? We have the transect week number. Transects are numbered 1 to 26. Number 1 always starts on April the 1st. So that week 14, for example, is always July the 1st. There are negative weeks, or 0 then negative, back in March, and numbers beyond 26 leading off into October. And I do use data from both of those extended months, March and October, where it's available. So these are the top counts in the month. In each transect week for each of these months. The top count is shown in the sort of pink colour, just to highlight them. Occasionally there are joint tops. Moving down here, I know there's one somewhere. Yeah, brown hair streak. Yeah, something else I should say is these are ordered by the first week seen. So brown hair streak was essentially the last of our species seen. So 22nd July, but there were 2 here with 11. I don't think the wall counts, that was just an occasional. Next up is the transect history. This is a complicated table. The table shows for every site ever walked, there's quite a lot, it shows how many years that site was walked for. So just for simplicity, we'll take Ashtead Common A. So it was walked for 10 years. It's the first 10 years of the decade. It's now moved on to Ashtead Common B, Ashtead Common North, etc. So this shows the number of times that transect was walked in each of those years. And the far right-hand side here simply adds them up to say this transect was walked 165 times. And as I say, etc. for all the transects. So the last tab here is the summary tab. And the summary contains a table followed by some graphics. So let's look at the table first. I only do this from 2012. As I said, there were issues with UK BMS in 2005, 7 and 9. And that made this table look a little strange. The columns there are graphed in the graphic below. And what I'll do is I'll switch back to the presentation for each of the graphics because the table simply shows what's on, the graphics show what's on that table. So, yeah. So this is the first one. So this is the number of transect sites there were in each year. This has gradually been increasing here. Huge thanks to Bill Downey for his efforts as transect coordinator. I've said before, I'll say it again, if you want to walk a transect, do contact Bill. There was a little dip in 2020. I wonder why that was. But also, not only were the number of transect sites up, the number of walkers increased as well. And that, again, had perhaps a bigger dip in 2020, but also now has reached a record. Next is the number of times a transect was walked. So there were more than 2,800 transects walked just in 2020. That's a tremendous achievement. The number of butterflies counted on those walks, however, has been a little down in the last few years. I can think of a couple of reasons why that might be the case. It might be there are less butterflies. this can be this particular graph here can be distorted by the large counts, the Chalk Hill Blues, the Meadow Browns. So if they have a good, bad year, things can change. Butterflies per site. So if you divide the number of butterflies, which we just saw, by the number of sites, it's how many butterflies you expect to see on each site in the year, and that's quite a lot. And last up is the number of butterflies per walk, how many butterflies you might see on each walk. Again, this is going to be distorted by the big hitter species. So we need to look now at the wider countryside butterfly scheme. So let's come back to the website and move to the top. Here we are. I really don't do a great deal as yet with this data. The wider countryside butterfly survey randomly allocates monads in a county to be walked in a specific way, specific time, etc. And it's a lot less effort than doing a transect, and it gives a broad spread of what's happening. What I should have done is keep the key on there. So I'm recording here on a quinquennial basis the last time these monads were surveyed. So there are unfortunately a few of the blue ones there. Again, contact Bill Downey if you need to, or if you feel inclined to take part in this. On the transects page, the previous one, there was a link to how transects, etc. were walked. That contains data about this too. Next tab is the species richness tab. So this looks basically at how many species were seen in each of the 2,105 monads in the county. Not surprisingly, the richest area is along the North Downs. The chalk downlands have a number of very specific species not seen elsewhere. There are inevitably a few rather thin monads around the edge of the county. They have very little area in the county in each of those monads. Below this is the plot of how many monads have each different number of species. And the peak here appears at 19. And that's the kind of distribution you more or less expect to see in something like this. A final button here is just some text on the county, describing the county, giving formal references for the atlases. But what I will say here is thanks to all the transect and other recorders who've made all this possible. Without them, this doesn't happen. So I need to return now to the presentation. I want to look now at some of the design issues in the production of all this data. So my approach was to create a processing environment for the automated generation of this data. And also of the associated graphics. I wanted to have minimal dependence on what it was that I was processing. So there are applications here to process the data, to produce the key output tables, some of which we've seen here already, but there are some others as well. And there's sort of minimal software as well to produce the graphics, the maps, and also, critically, all the web pages. I don't want to sit there writing web pages by hand. The underlying technology in the result is HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and Ping graphics, all pretty standard. It is possible to use these pages offline if you have the appropriate files without any internet connection, so you can take them with you on a phone to places that have no internet connection at all. I should also say here there are no cookies or trackers or anything like that in software. It's all incredibly clean. So the actual technology used, the software was all written in Ada 2022. The Ada language is based at high integrity systems, things like aircraft fly-by-wire. Mars rover has had one, an Ada system. It's named after Ada Lovelace, the local hero of computing, or one of the local heroes of computing. The graphics I produced with Python using the Spider environment, and the maps come from QGIS, which is a reasonably standard and free mechanism for map creation, and various sources of data. The Natural England data, I've used their maps of SSSIs. We didn't see any graphics with that on today. An interesting point in modern web design is the responsive web design, which is basically making web pages work on all the different devices now available. In the old days, all computer screens were roughly the same size, so it didn't really matter. But now we have very large screens and also very small screens, for example, on phones. So you need to make sure that the text is always readable and the graphics display correctly and everything zooms and scrolls, etc. While you go. So first up, I want to look at what happens on a wide screen. So this is now a widescreen. The website will get smaller. The background color here, as we saw before, green on the left and blue on the right. So it's green grass, blue sky, and the butterflies are in the middle. It was just to give the thing some sort of artistic merit. I don't let the text form extremely long lines across the screen, difficult to read, and the graphic only gets to a certain size and then stops getting bigger. But as we reduce the size of the screen, the graphic scrolls down, and eventually the text starts to scroll and the buttons scroll too. And we get to a certain size, it's just about there, where the background color disappears and the text gets a little bit smaller. The system has realized that we're now on a smaller device. This is still bigger than most phones. So this goes on getting smaller and smaller. I guess most phones are something like this. So the text actually remains readable, but the graphics are awfully small. As we'll see in a minute on a real phone, that's not a problem. Okay. So I return now to there. So we need now to move to a real phone. So let's switch to a real phone. Here is the phone. I can scroll down this and the text is eminently readable. The graphics are not bad, but I can zoom in down to and scroll down the page to the other plots, etc. And scroll about, and that works. And we see that the coloured background is still here. If I now rotate the phone, now I've got the vertical view. The graphics look a little bit small, but I can still zoom in and see anything I need to. Text gets a bit big like this. And here's the plot. The buttons have all scrolled. Species are available down the left-hand side here. And it's all responsive. And the graphics seem to work quite well. We look at some additional capabilities. In addition to the web pages which you've seen, and there's plenty to look at there, I output some specific data tables for internal use, tables related to species, tables related to transects, tables related to transect walkers, for example. Because of the lack of the dependence on the data that I'm looking at here, the scope to run other data through the same applications. We'll see that in a minute. So, some final observations here. Okay, copyrights. I use copyrighted data, but I always reference that on the plot that I'm using. Those three. Acknowledgements. Huge thanks to Francis Kelly. He wrote all the species descriptions. He's far more suited to do that than me. Bill Downey did the priority species descriptions. Both of those helped a lot in the ongoing saga of the creation of this site. Gillian Elsom, my wife, for the larval host plant data. We didn't really do that justice today. Harry Clark provides the VC17 data as the Vice County Recorder, and that's very appreciated. And a final shout out to the Surrey Botanical Society for their plant data. We didn't really get around to that very much. We saw the prunus data on the brown hair streaks. There's a few others as well. We hope this is just the start of an ongoing plan to give timely data to members, but we are limited by when data becomes available. But your feedback is welcome. What else is needed? What do you expect the site to do? Does it do it the way you want it? So the email there is for comments, etc. And looking to the future, well, the data will receive a big update, of course, when the 2023 season's data is ready. The site will probably get enhancements before then. And there's a possibility to reuse this mechanism for other vice counties or even families of insects or whatever. We already have a version, pretty much like the one you've just seen, for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. It has a limited amount of data at the moment, but it shows how the scheme can be extended. For example, when the 2022 data was available for VC17, the incorporation of the data took probably only half a day to create all the table, the website, everything, and another half day to do all the specific species, the priority species maps, which have to be done individually by hand. So it doesn't take a lot of effort to produce a new set of data. Well, that's about all. Many thanks for listening. I hope people have found this useful, and I hope people will find the site useful as well. Thank you.